Secret Room Multimedia.
.com.
I read this interesting science fiction novel. I wish I could remember which one it was, but they have Jesus saying something like, "I taught the people to drink water as if it was wine," and
Misinterpretation.
yeah, Jesus himself telling the story that way, and then it gets handed down through the ages as he made the water transform into wine. But what he was really doing was saying, you can even drink water as if it was wine. Appreciate it for the wonderful thing that water is.
It's just like monster movies when you make a religion by committee. I think people will like it more what if he actually turned the water to wine?
Yeah.
What if Moses partied in the Red Sea?
Oh.
That's the Cheech and Chong version.
Let's do that.
That would be cool.
I'm Nathan Kappesser.
And I'm Craig Lewis.
It's Craig Lewis.
Well, I can't pronounce Dogen properly. How do you expect me to pronounce my own freaking name?
You know what you did? Well, we're
what did I do?
Here.
You want to tell me what I did?
You were saying it right all day, and then when you were on the spot, you did what I've seen myself do plenty of times, and plenty of other people, is you suddenly doubted that you had been pronouncing it right all along, and you pronounced it differently than you normally would have, which was the right way, and because you were doubting, and then you said it the wrong way.
Absolutely, 100% correct right there, Nathan. In my mind, as I was saying it, I shifted myself while saying it, and I'm just like,
yes.
Well, I had said it, but he never said if I was doing it right or not before. Did he know I was doing it right? It doesn't sound right.
I know I can think of plenty of times that I've done that. I can't think of specific times, but I know I've done it, and I know I've heard other people do it too. So.
And then
no shame.
Well, at least in the spirit of a lot of the rest of my life, I just took a shot and made the wrong decision.
Well, anyway, you're listening to Fair Enoga Podcast.
Fair enough.
Podcast. The complimentary side series to Fairpoint Podcast. And today is, oh my God, I haven't been this excited for an episode.
Oh, nobody's God, you mean?
Oh, nobody's God. I haven't been so excited for an episode.
This was a really good one.
Since we started Fair Enough, yeah.
No offense to all the other Fair Enough guests.
Yeah, but I talk to you guys all the time.
Yeah.
Most of you, anyway.
But yeah, we have author of It Came From Beyond Zen, Brad Warner, to talk about said book.
Yes, Brad Warner is one of my favorite authors. I have pretty much every book he's written. And his shtick is basically he's a punk rock Buddhist. That doesn't do him justice, though. But
yeah, I wish I could say he was one of my favorite authors, but he didn't write Lord of the Rings, so... Punk rock Buddhist just sounds really cool and almost like its own contradiction.
Well, that's great because Dogen and we'll talk about him in a minute. I'm jumping the gun. They loved contradictions. Those Zen monks sure love their contradictions. Brad Warner is a great enigmatic figure in the world of Buddhism and of so-called spiritual books. It started off in the 80s in Akron, Ohio as like a bassist for a punk rock band. Zero
Buddhism
Defects.
was?
No. Brad Warner. Yeah.
Brad Warner was. Buddhism started off in Akron, Ohio.
It's a popular movement all throughout Asia, which
called Zero Defects.
It actually started in Ohio. So Brad Warner started off in the punk rock scene, the hardcore scene in the 80s in Ohio, and eventually he moved to Japan to teach English. It was mostly just a job and an opportunity to get out of the country. And
that's probably, listen, if you want to get a teaching job and just get out of the country too, your best bet is, hey, what do I know best? My own language.
Yeah, right. So he learned Japanese, went to Japan, started teaching kids English, and then ended up getting a job working for Subaraya Productions, who makes the Ultraman. Do you know Ultraman, the show?
Yep.
Kind of like, for those who aren't familiar, he's like a Power Ranger. But
he's the original Sentai, right?
Yeah,
One of them.
I don't know if he's actually part of that company, Sentai, but a similar design. That trope of superhero, and instead of jumping into a robot like the Power Rangers do, he just turns giant and fights these giant Godzilla monsters. He's in Asia, he's bigger than Superman. He's pretty gigantic, and he has representation like all over the world except America.
Go figure.
Yeah, but
We have Power Rangers.
he ended up working there for a while, and you can see him in bit shots and random episodes of Ultraman, and he worked a lot behind the scenes, and then became ordained as a Zen monk.
That's right. We had somebody that was ordained come and Zen bless our shit.
He didn't give us any type of blessings. He probably would have turned the podcast off
He'd have been
had
like,
we asked for that.
You don't understand Buddhism, do you? No, I do not. Not really, no. But he does. Nathan does. He's going to correct me every time.
No, those who say they understand Buddhism don't know what they're talking about. But yeah, I get it.
Would you say you understand?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when I tell people about this guy and his past, they a lot of times will jump to the conclusion that, okay, so he was involved in this hedonistic scene and then he turned his life around and became a Zen monk.
Oh, because he was in a hardcore band?
Yeah, exactly. No.
So he was hedonistic? Oh, yeah, okay.
He's still the same Brad, but of course he's grown and become Zen practice. I recommend it to everybody. It's something he's said before is, I think that it's analogous to brushing your teeth. He believes that in the future people will look back and be like, can you believe people didn't used to sit for 10 minutes every morning? Like, can you believe people didn't do that like back in the past?
Yeah.
Just like we look back and like people didn't brush their fucking teeth.
You know what else is interesting? It's a big practice in Japan, correct? And with the stereotype of the busy Japanese businessman, like go, I'm busy, I got to make deals. How do they have time to sit down and meditate?
Everybody has time. It's bullshit that when people say they don't have time.
Everybody,
If you say that you don't have time or if you say that it doesn't work for you, that's bullshit because
I really could just watch 10 less minutes of YouTube videos.
Yeah, exactly. You get up 10 minutes earlier. Like,
nope, don't have time to do that. Too tired from watching YouTube videos the night before.
Yeah, bullshit. And yet you know how Breaking Bad ended, but you don't have time to sit down. Fucking do 5 minutes. But and when people say it doesn't work, I'm going to borrow another thing from Brad, but he says like that's like saying you can't exercise because you sweat and get tired when you do it. That's part of exercising. It's part of meditation that your mind's going to wander and you're going to have all these crazy thoughts. And
I can't do it. My mind just wanders.
That's
that's the point.
That happens. But I'm not here to teach you how to do Zen. I'm here to talk about this awesome new book that I had the privilege of reading. It came from Beyond Zen.
It came from Beyond Zen. I'm not a Buddhist, and I had a lot of fun reading this. I said during the interview that he honestly, legitimately does a great job of digesting it and like regurgitating it to us to digest. Like all of us non-Buddhist, non-understanding people can listen to this and be the baby bird, getting it regurgitated into our mouths and ear holes.
Somehow you made the cover of the book less off-putting. The cover of the book is amazing.
All right, but this book mostly centers around the teachings of Dogen.
Yes.
But we didn't really talk about Dogen while we were interviewing him. So Nathan, could you please enlighten the listeners a little bit on who Dogen really is?
Dogen was a 13th century Japanese monk. He basically
basics down now. Okay, so got it.
The story of Buddhism, Buddhism.
Say no more. I understand now.
Buddhism. Oh yeah, Buddhism. I get it.
Buddhism. Yes,
I understand. No, Buddhism started in India with a prince that one day went out of the confines of his castle and his royal grounds and saw like an old person and a sick person. This is the myth, the story, the folktale version of it.
And that was the birth of privilege.
It was
of understanding privilege.
Yes, exactly. And this was a real historical. These are all historical people that I'm talking about, although there are folktales and myths about them. So how much of this is factually true is up to debate, but not important. So the story goes he went outside of the grounds one day and for the first time encountered suffering and didn't realize there were hungry people and sick people and old people and dying people and poor people and he was just like, what is this? So he was driven to leave his home and to go explore the mind and figure out what this was. And he supposedly sat down under a tree for years. Again, this is probably very embellished, but it doesn't matter. That happened in India. And that's the guy people refer to when they say the Buddha. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. He was a real historical figure.
I read that book, Siddhartha.
Nice. So then Bodhidharma was the name of the man that brought Buddhism. I believe that was. It's been a while since I've read a lot of these books.
Bodhidharma and Bodhi Greg.
Bodhidharma brought Buddhism from India to China, and it became very big in China. And then Dogen, his parents died when he was really young, and so he went out trying to figure out, is life just suffering? Is like what is this life thing?
Yeah.
And he went to China. He traveled to China, learned under a lot of different Buddhist masters, and there were teachers there that were able to impart something that he wasn't able to find elsewhere. So he brought that to Japan. And Dogen was a very no-nonsense, almost punk rock himself teacher. There's a lot of jokes in his writing. There's a lot of comedy and a lot of no holds barred. I mean, Brad's going to talk a lot about this, so I don't want to talk too much. But his book, It Came From Beyond Zen, is basically the second part of the third book about the Shobogenzo, I believe, and the second book that's taking the Shobogenzo is Dogen's big masterpiece. It's like 70-something chapters or something.
Right, that's the giant book with a bunch of different essays in it. Correct? A bunch of different essays on teachings.
Exactly. And he just, a year ago or so, he published a book called Don't Be a Jerk, which also has a fantastic cover.
So he's got a pretty quick turnaround then, too. Good on you, man. I try to write something. It takes me more than a year to get 2 things out.
Fair point, podcast. And it's basically his translation of these texts into a more modern colloquial framework. I mean, I wish I had a specific quote pulled aside, but there's one when he's saying like finding something outside of the universe would be like finding a hipster that doesn't like lattes. He takes like modern references and puts, obviously Dogen wasn't talking about hipsters and lattes.
Right. But if we can more easily equate our life to hipsters and lattes because that's what we see all the fucking time.
Yeah. And
as opposed to what he was actually saying, because it's a similar thing.
And it makes it more fun to read and also makes certain points more evident. There's points in the book where he changes specific words completely because what the word is being translated as, while kind of accurate to the word, isn't accurate to the thought that he was expressing, just because, I mean, the way people spoke in Japan hundreds of years ago is different than the way people speak in Japan now. So it's like Dogen had to translate Chinese ideas into ancient Japanese, and then modern Japanese people have to translate ancient Dogen into modern Japanese, and then English-speaking people have to translate that into English. And
then we have to finally take all of that and put it in a way for us to actually understand.
But I think he does a very fine job of it, and
he does. I praised him during the interview, and I 100% mean it. It's very hard for me to comprehend these vague principles and teachings, and just sometimes the wordplay on it, because it's so old, is hard to understand, and I got it. I'm getting it.
People get caught up in this new age, flowery, poetic nonsense sometimes. And don't get me wrong, I love poems. I love poetry. And I think it's very eloquent to express these truths through the art of poetry. But at the same time, people can get too hung up on and lost in these exotic sounding phrases when really what he's saying is, no, sit down in front of the wall for 10 minutes a day.
Yeah, that's all he's saying, but he's saying it in a very pretty way.
So this conversation's a lot of fun. We talk about more than just Buddhism. We talk about whether or not you're into Zen. It's things that can apply to anybody's life, whether or not you're from the 13th century.
And honestly, you can not be into Zen and still be down with certain practices of Zen.
Plus, we talk about monsters and science fiction and Star Trek. So.
Yeah, that too. All the above. We got our nerd moments with them. So, I guess we'll meet you back here at the ending, right? So, without further ado,
Brad motherfucking Warner.
So hardcore.
Sir Brad Warner? No, he's not knighted.
Just learned the bass parts of Freddy's Dead.
Really?
Oh my God, I love it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I'm a gigantic fan since about 10 years ago or so when I saw Hardcore Zen, monster movies, punk rock, and the truth about reality. I was like, this book was tailor-made for me. Why haven't I found this yet? And since then, I have pretty much every book you've written except for Death to All Monsters. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I can't find
don't bother with that one.
I can't find it. But
yeah, it's self-published. I published it. You can only get it on Amazon anyway. So,
well, I absolutely love Gill Women of the Prehistoric Planet.
Oh, you do?
I love it. I'm
glad somebody likes that. I don't hear much about that one.
Oh no, I'm hoping that you're going to write more fiction one day. I'd have to say it's my favorite. Like I've read all your books about Buddhism, but
really, honestly,
I love it. I love it.
And I don't know if you could tell yet or not, but get ready for the gushing hour over here.
No, it's great. It's great you like it because I really put a lot into that book, and it was my last sort of attempt at writing a fiction novel. Before then, I embarked on writing hardcore Zen, and then finally got somebody to publish me. But so I'm glad somebody likes it. There's a couple of people who've told me they really like it, so I feel like it's all right.
No, I do. I like it a lot.
Good.
And I really love this new one too. It came from Beyond Zen. Thank you so much for sending me the copy of it. I couldn't be more humbled and honored. It was great. And you just got back from Europe. How was your trip?
It was good. I just spent a month over there. I went to, let me get it right, Finland, Sweden, Germany, and England this time, and did retreats. So people kind of ask me that question, just friends of mine, how was Europe? And they don't realize I'm working the whole time. I'm basically, all I get to see of Europe is different walls in different rooms. So
yeah, you're not on vacation.
I go to Finland, I spend 5 days looking at a wall in Finland, go to Sweden, and yeah, it's just like that. But, this is my 7th or 8th time doing this. I'm not really clear on when I started. I guess 2009. So I've been doing these European tours every year for a while, and kind of going to the same basic places, but each year there's somebody new added to the mix. So yeah, it's fun and it's interesting to see it through a different culture and to get out of the United States for a little while. That's always interesting.
Yeah, totally. I personally have a question about a lot of your works focus on the teachings of Dogen.
Dogen.
I can't pronounce through text.
You said it right like 50 times before we started recording.
Maybe.
Well, it's a common mistake because if you go through English spelling rules, it looks like it should be Dogen, but it's a Japanese name, so it's Dogen.
Thank you for being on my side about it, at least.
Yeah.
But anyways, what is it about his teachings per se that draw you to him over other Buddhist teachers?
I like him because he's. I'm going to put this bass down. I like him because he's really super realistic and super honest. To tell the truth, when I first encountered Dogen, I had as much trouble understanding him as anybody. People always find him difficult.
I don't see why. I mean, the concept of it and everything.
Yeah. Well, once you kind of get into the rhythm and the sense of what he's saying, he comes across as being the most straightforward guy you can imagine, even though when you first read it, it just seems like weird poetry. But he's actually trying to describe the world as it actually is, beyond our concepts of language and how you express things. It's a different sort of logic, and I find him really, really interesting because he's way ahead of his own time too.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've read the book, I spend a lot of time in the introduction describing how obscure Dogen was up until the 20th century.
I do want to thank you, though, because, I mean, you talking about his works make it a lot more easy to digest.
Well, thanks. That's my goal in writing these books, from Sit Down and Shut Up, all the Dogen books, Don't Be a Jerk, and It Came from Beyond Zen, is because, I can kind of forgive the scholars for their treatment of Dogen because that's kind of their job. But so the first people who discovered Dogen were scholars of East Asian religions, right? And they presented him the way scholars present things, but they tend to try to at once preserve the original sense of the language, and also convey the mysterious otherness of the whole thing, because it's a great journey of discovery for them. But I feel like that kind of tends to bury the real message. you get lost in all this.
All this thusness.
Yeah. Or it gets kind of lost in all the scholarly language and attempts to preserve ancient Japanese grammatical structure and stuff. When you're doing a straight translation, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to present it as it actually is. And what I've got the luxury, because other people have already done that I can write books where I can ignore all that stuff and say, well, here's what I think he's saying.
I think that's great too, because translation, what you're doing is, it's all mannerisms of speech. So if you're able to change something that he's saying you're not using the exact words that they linguistically translate to, but the thought behind it translates to a more modern thought, the way you substitute gold for French fries or something like that.
Yeah.
That may be a more silly example, but that's actually something I really appreciated about the book. Is you go back to the original text. There are plenty of times where you actually show the original Japanese and Chinese characters. So if anyone wants to challenge it, they don't even have to Google. It's right there. And I love the way you indulge in the different translations and the different ways that it can be interpreted. That language forms the way we understand reality in a way. So I loved it.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really important part. And I was a little bit. There was a review that just came out that was a positive review, but the author of the review complained that I spent too much time, dabbling in those things you just mentioned, these translation, really getting really specific about why different translations are this way or that way. To me, that was really important, because I want to know whenever I read a translation of Dogen or of anybody else, I kind of want to know, well, how did they do this? What did they change? I want to kind of dig in behind the scenes. So that's what I tried to do with my book, is I tried to say, okay, here's how I did it. Here's what I did, and here's how I did it.
I've never seen a book on Buddhism like that, and I really appreciate that, because a lot of listeners might be more familiar with things like the mistranslations in the Bible, and with the Da Vinci Code being popular, and and how if you go back to the original text, maybe Judas wasn't a traitor, or maybe this, maybe that, and to see that with this, especially, I've been reading Buddhist books since I was in high school, and you do get to a lot of language where it's either too poetic or just I don't understand what the hell that means, and a lot of times that is because just the way Japanese is structured. And Dogen also is taking Indian ideas through a Chinese lens and translating them to Japanese, correct? So
So there's a whole lot going on behind the scenes, and then if you know that, you can follow along for yourself. But thinking about my own predilections, I'm always I'm a movie fan, as a monster movie fan, and I'm actually as interested in how the movie was made as in the actual movie. And I'm always a little mystified that other people sometimes aren't, but I want to know how it came together. And I think this kind of stuff is interesting. So, I'm trying to put it out there. And I just kind of wanted to dig in, you talk about the translations and things being kind of a jumble. There were places where when I've worked really closely, I'm pointing to my own copy of the book, by the way, where I can look at 4 different translations that all say something different. And then I go look at what the original says, and I go, oh, I see why all these guys said something different, because I'll look at the original and go, the original is really hard to understand. For example, Dogen often quotes Chinese sources, but leaves them in Chinese. And a lot of the translators who translated him, they know Japanese, but they don't know Chinese. So, this might be getting a little technical. If you know how to read Japanese, you automatically know how to read a bit of Chinese, but because they use basically the same character sets. That's putting it in short version. But they use them very differently. So if you only know Japanese and you read a Chinese quotation, you're kind of like, ugh, I know what these words are, but I don't know what they add up to. And so you often get cases like that where the translators are just going, oh, and they got to put something. So they put something in there.
You don't just add your own jokes to it. You preserve a lot of the humor that's just naturally there from Dogen's sense of humor, which I think is amazing. There aren't a lot of, teachers in this realm that utilize humor and jokes, and obviously that's something we appreciate. This is a little bit of a weird question, but I was kind of hoping you might want to talk a little bit. In the book, you talk about the value of kind speech and cooperation, which is awesome. Right. And also, I know you come from a punk rock background, and I was hoping you might be able to talk a little bit about the dichotomy between maybe ruthless satire and rebellion and kind speech and cooperation.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's an interesting question because I don't know. It sort of depends on your audience. When I first started writing, I think I was a little bit more punk rock than I became, because I started realizing, I've got this bigger audience than I thought I had. I when I wrote Hardcore Zen, I didn't think I had any audience at all. Honestly, I thought there were 0 people going to read that book. But as I've gone on, there is a difference. If you understand the way people tend to express things in a certain idiom, then you can understand that it's not necessarily unkind speech to. Are we allowed to use expletives on this?
Yes, curse as much as you want.
If you say this is fucking stupid, it's a difference between in one context saying that would sound rude and insulting. In another context, it doesn't. And so I try to establish a context, in the form of the book and the presentation of it and everything, so that the reader will be prepared to understand that this is not. I'm not going to be necessarily polite in the sense that people might understand politeness. I guess I'm sounding weird now, but I think it's important to be forthright. Like Dogen himself, he gets pretty nasty in certain passages. I actually didn't translate the worst one. There is one where
I'm sorry. When you say nasty, do you mean nasty in a brutally honest sense, or in a that was just disrespectful?
Well, a little bit of both, honestly.
Yeah?
There's one passage where he talks about this famous Zen master who's still very highly revered, named Ta Hui. And he just rips the guy a new one. It's pretty brutal, and it gets almost personally insulting. He says things, to the effect of you don't know what you're talking about, Ta Hui, and you're just an imbecile and a late learner and all this stuff. For his idiom, really strong expressions. But you have to realize that Ta Hui is actually, when Dogen is writing this, Ta Hui was dead. So he's not writing.
So he's just mocking a dead guy.
Yeah, he's mocking a dead guy, but there's a difference between mocking a dead guy and mocking a live guy, because what you're really doing is you're saying something about that guy's words.
Right. And the other way, you're just starting a rat beef if he's alive.
Yeah. And people kind of misconstrue that because they don't realize where it was said and when it was said. So, you have to be honest, and you have to call bullshit on things that are bullshit. I think that's important, and I think just trying to be polite and leaving things stand that shouldn't stand is not a good idea. If that makes any sense.
That actually does make a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you about, this is going to make me sound like an insensitive Vulcan, but
so keep going.
What I feel like when you do years of Zen practice, you come to conclusions. I guess recognitions might be a better word than conclusions. I don't know. You're better at putting this into words than I am, so that's why I'm asking you about it.
Okay.
But I find when you get drawn into discussions with people, it's difficult to qualify the difference between maybe something that you've recognized about the world and a religious belief or an opinion. And how do you handle that with tact and not coming off like an asshole?
I mean, again, it depends on who you're talking to and why. If somebody, usually people who I don't know, I don't talk religion to people much unless it's within the context of my, work. I don't start religious discussions with family members and just friends who aren't really interested in that stuff.
I feel you there.
I like having the discussions in general, but I just, if people aren't interested, I don't want to bother them with it. So generally, if somebody's asking me about something, they know where I'm coming from. I think in another context, my teachers, one thing he taught me that I thought was really good, that I've used variations on forever, is the best answer to give sometimes is, I don't think so. He used to tell me that, sometimes I just say, I don't think so. Because if you think about that, you can't really argue with I don't think so, because that's just, I don't think so. So you kind of leave it at you're not trying to establish an absolute. You're not saying, well, it is this way. You can say, well, I think it's this way, or it looks this way to me. That's the way I usually try to diffuse those. You have if you do Zazen long enough, you develop a different sort of perspective on life that really reaches into all aspects of life. And it becomes sometimes difficult to talk to people who don't have that sort of background, because they're not going to understand what the hell you're talking about. They can feel insulted by it because you're just talking from a different sort of angle.
Okay, so Guardian wrote an article about a man who had used meditation to numb all his emotions to commit a heinous attack. And then they directly paralleled that.
Killed people, right?
Tons of people, yeah. And set off a bomb. And then they directly paralleled that to Japanese Buddhists rejoicing the attacks on Pearl Harbor. That's just... How do you make that comparison? One. Two, that seems like this high level of ignorance just about Buddhism in general. And how frequently do you deal with things like that on a regular everyday basis? Like people that just are that wrong?
Well, yeah, it comes up from time to time. Buddhism is a new thing to the West. And one thing I've said so many times, it just tumbles out of my mouth without effort anymore, is I like to tell people, for one thing, there's a lot of different kinds of Buddhisms. Buddhism is 500 years older than Christianity, and we all know Christianity not only includes Catholicism and Presbyterians, but includes the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and a lot of other things that are far from what you think of as mainstream Christianity.
Rastafarians.
Same thing happens. Yeah, Rastafarians. Yeah, I think you could consider them a form of Christianity. So yeah, you got forms of Buddhism that are just like that. So to just say all Buddhism is the same is wrong, and to kind of compare I think I said it in the book. They said the Japanese Buddhists celebrated the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Well, yeah, you could say German Christians celebrated, the bombing of London. That doesn't, it's meaningless.
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense.
Also, even with us, most recently with 9/11, how we're talking about how the Muslims were celebrating the attacks on the World Trade Center. Just okay.
You could probably find some Muslims who celebrated it, but is it widespread through the entire community? I don't actually think so in that case. But yeah, you got all sorts of things, and there have been people, I wouldn't really call them Buddhists. There have been people who've used the techniques developed by Buddhism as a way to kind of numb their emotions. Historically, in Japan, the greatest example is some of the samurai realized that they could become extremely efficient fighters if they practiced meditation, because you kind of get into this very focused zone where nothing matters except what you're doing at that moment, which is one of the reasons that when Zen Buddhism is actually taught, there is always a lot of emphasis on ethics. I can't tell you how many times I've read somebody say Zen Buddhism has no ethical standards. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You have no idea. If you say that, that's just ignorant. That's there's no other word for it. But this gets spread, it gets repeated over and over.
You talk about people using meditation and everything to hone their skills or their attention and focus. And in the book, you talk a lot about, you call them superpowers. I think the original word is more closely miracle.
Yeah, miracles. Yeah.
I find that really interesting too, because even just down to the basic assumption of like meditating to relieve stress or meditating to achieve enlightenment is kind of a yearning to get superpowers out of it. But you also talk about the Buddha shooting fire out of his head. I find that really interesting too. Plus, it's just fun to read about.
Yeah, well, a lot of people don't know that about Buddhism, and it's because all the different kinds of Buddhisms get mixed together and then presented as if they're one thing. But there are miracle stories and things like that in Buddhist texts that you can find. And I thought it was real interesting in the chapter you're talking about, the way Dogen deals with that when he's talking to an audience of lay people, just sort of like, the equivalent of churchgoers and he's talking in rural Japan. So, these are kind of folks who don't really know much. They probably can't even read. They just know the stories they've been told. And so they're aware of these miracle stories. And he doesn't refute them. He doesn't do what Richard Dawkins and people like that do and try to refute the existence of these phenomena. He just says, okay, well, even if that's true, the real miracle is that there is a world in which miracles can happen. This is it. We're already living in a place that's incredibly improbable. I'm just looking around my apartment and thinking, this is like totally improbable. And we miss that because we kind of go, oh, this is just my apartment. It's fine, but if I don't know, a floating eyeball appeared in the air in the center of the room, then that would be a miracle. Well, yeah, that would be a miracle, but the miracle is also that there's a room to begin with, That's already amazing. Yeah. Without adding anything else to it.
Well, also, that's another parallel with Christianity, too. Because, you look at the Bible, you can talk about Jesus, turning water into wine, Moses parting the Red Sea. Those are all miracles, too, and like, did they really happen? Or are we just taking them literally or metaphorically?
Yeah, I don't know. I read this interesting science fiction novel. I wish I could remember which one it was, but they have Jesus saying something like, I taught the people to drink water as if it was wine.
Misinterpretation.
Yeah, Jesus himself telling the story that way, and then it gets handed down through the ages as he made the water transform into wine. But what he was really doing was saying, you can even drink water as if it was wine. Appreciate it for the wonderful thing that water is.
It's just like monster movies when you make a religion by committee. I think people will like it more what if he actually turned the water to wine?
Yeah.
What if Moses partied in the Red Sea?
Oh.
That's the Cheech and Chong version.
Let's do that.
That would be cool.
Another thing that I found really fun in the book was the chapter about instructions for the cook.
Oh, right.
I'm a huge proponent of, I guess I'd consider myself a writer, and I love the idea of using the medium that you're using to like its strengths, that doing things you could only do in that medium. So if you're writing a comic book, you're utilizing the art and the format of using panels and word bubbles. If you're writing a novel, if you're making a movie, you're utilizing the cinematography. And the way Dogen wrote this, instructions for the cook, which is basically the medium it's instructions for a cook, but he's imparting wisdom. And I loved that too. Like, that's super cool.
Yeah, I think instructions of the cook is one of the most interesting pieces of writing that Dogen did. And it was actually by request. I put it out on Facebook or something, like, I'm doing another book, and is there anything people would like to see in it? And like several people wrote to me saying they wanted to see instructions for the cook. And instructions for the cook is this. I actually learned about it as I was writing the book. I didn't realize this was like one of the most obscure pieces of Dogen's writings for years. It was actually discovered in a box. In the back of a temple. Some monk in the 17th century or something was going through some archives in a temple and found this tattered paper in a box. and realized it was actually a piece of Dogen's writings that had not been discovered yet. And it's since gone on to become one of the most popular pieces because, as you say, on a superficial level, it's just instructions for how to be a cook in a Zen monastery. You know, it's kind of nuts and bolts stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of really deep wisdom in there, and some of the best Dogen quotes come out of instructions for the cook, like the famous "Nothing is hidden," you know, which I really like. I kind of went on that one a little bit in the book because I think a lot of religions come from the place that, you know, there is a hidden something, you know, God is up there in the sky with his ideas, and you have to figure out what the hell he wants you to do. You know, it's a mystery. But Dogen says nothing is hidden. Like everything you need to know is available right there to you, which is a kind of a radical concept, I think.
It is. I love the way that you, particularly your brand of Zen. I know it's Soto Zen, but you as one of the only teachers maybe in the West then that is it's a really down to earth approach, but I think it can also be misinterpreted by people not familiar with it as just materialism, I guess. Basic, there's nothing more to it. It's just your boring life. But at the same time, there is this fantastical truth about the fact that it's just your boring life that's beautiful. I don't know. I guess that's not really a question.
No, well, I think it's a good point because it's something that was a problem for me when I first started. I kind of when I first started getting into Zen, I was, and I still even remain skeptical about it. You know, there's always little bits that I'm like, really?
I sometimes wonder if what I attribute to Zen practice is just growing up, and that my mom did it too.
Well, that's actually true. But then I look around and I go, well, there's a lot of people older than me that are still struggling with ideas that I kind of passed. But yeah, this idea that it's a materialistic philosophy, or it's just saying, you know, everything is just the way it is, and yeah, that bothered me because I wanted to believe in like a spiritual world of gods and angels and celestial whatever. You know, you kind of want to have those fantasies sometimes, but what it's not really saying there's nothing but this mundane world. It does say that, but it also says, you know, there's nothing but this mundane world, but take a look at this so-called mundane world and you'll find that it is more miraculous than anything you could have invented in your mind about some other place that you think would be cooler than that. I mean, there are molecules floating around that have formed themselves into this, you know, and that's pretty spectacular. I don't understand that at all, but it's, you know, it started off from crystals growing under the ocean, and now you've got this guy talking to you on a computer. It's really, and it's all the same stuff.
And how many thousands of miles are between us, you know? And we're able to just have a live conversation with each other.
It's amazing, and the fact that it's the same stuff that was around on this planet, you know, 200 million years ago or more. I'm sure 4 billion years ago. The net sum total of stuff on this earth has barely changed in all that time. Yet it keeps forming itself into all kinds of crazy stuff. And yeah, you know, I can remember a time when the kind of conversation that we're having right now would be something you'd see in science fiction movies. Right. In the year 3000, they are able to talk to each other on video conferences.
Somehow the computers were still 60s computers, but...
I love those. Whenever I watch Star Trek, I'm always like, what does that button do? And how do they know what that button does? Because it's not labeled.
It's not labeled.
You know, there's like a red one and a blue one and a green one, and they're all blinking. And you're like, how does Mr. Spock know which one to push?
It's the control board. He can feel it.
I was so frustrated the deeper I got into Star Trek that, like, as a child, until I had watched more and more and more of it, I had assumed that the world was so much more defined and fleshed out than it really was, just by the level of geek obsession, that like I had assumed there was some consistency as to like whether or not other people could hear the communicators or things like that.
They're not really consistent with that, are they? Or you know, or just, I mean, the thing you have to do because it's drama is everybody has to be able to speak the same language, but Or else you'd spend the whole episode with him just deciphering the language, and then that would be it. But then you have to go, well, how does Mr. Spock know how to talk, to that plant creature?
Yeah, they have the universal translators, but even that doesn't explain how when they meet a new... anyway.
An unknown race of people.
It's a whole level of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, though, if you think about it, like I said, 25 years ago, people were projecting things like what we're doing now to be like something we'd get to in 100 years. So who knows? Maybe they'll figure out a way to make a universal translator and we'll all be able to talk.
Still waiting for self-tying Reeboks.
They got Velcro, man. I bought you the Velcro
Come
pair.
on,
Just
man.
wear the Velcro pair.
Listen, I am over Velcro.
If you don't mind me maybe spoiling, it's not a fictional narrative, so I hope it's not that big a deal. But at the end of the book, you talk about something which I found really fascinating. Very briefly, you touch upon this idea that maybe, and I hope we don't get too caught up in the language of it, but that maybe God wondering about his own existence, and don't get caught up in the language of the pronouns, but maybe God wondering about his own existence is analogous to us wondering about our existence and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the pronoun thing. It's unfortunate that in English you have to use a male gender pronoun to talk about God, but it's a linguistic convention and I accept it. So that having been said, I think maybe our wondering about our origin and what we are and our function in the universe and all that is equivalent to God wondering what the hell he's doing here. If you kind of think about what God is, God probably includes both ultimate knowledge and ultimate confusion. In the sense that if it's absolute, it has to include both sides. And I think part of our job is explaining God to himself. I think maybe this, when I get in my more weirdo moments, I think maybe that's what our function is in terms of the universe, is to try to figure it out.
Hey,
and to always fail.
It made sense to me. Then again, I loved Gill Women of the Prehistoric Planet, so take that for what it's worth.
There you go.
I'm just trying to rationalize all of this, and to me, it just feels like we're asking the question: what if God was one of us?
Who did that? Was that Sheryl Crow? Who was that? Who did that song?
Oh, it was a one-hit wonder. No, that was
no.
I was about to say Meredith Brooks. That was I'm a Bitch.
I think that's a legitimate question. I mean, the word God. If you've read my books, I wrote a whole book about that concept, and people really get bothered by it. I had the luxury of growing up non-religious, so my family was not exactly atheist or anything, but they just didn't care. We didn't go to church or anything.
Lucky.
So yeah, I think so. Compared to some people I've heard, so that word doesn't have that tint for me, that weird sort of associations it gets if you grew up in a religious family. But I think it's a fascinating concept, and you can say Buddhism doesn't have a concept of God in the sense that it doesn't try to conceive God, but that's not exactly the same as saying there's no God isn't part of Buddhism. There is a sense that when you sum the entire universe up and try to talk about it as one single thing, that one single thing includes intelligence and includes feeling and includes a sense of being alive. So that's a way of describing God, if you ask me. It's the universe as a living thing.
Yeah, I was actually really happy when I was already reading your books when you had announced there is no God and he is always with you. And just from the title alone, that's always been something I thought about too, is that I think the word God is a really important word. There's no other word that works, at least not in our current language, and yet it has some really unfortunate baggage that makes it really difficult to talk to. Some people you'll talk to, they will literally just refuse to accept, like, can you just accept that I mean something different when I say God? And then they'll still argue that there's no man in the sky. And you're like, oh my God. I mean, wait.
Yeah. I mean, nobody's God.
That was my big disappointment, because I in preparation for writing that book, when I had the idea of writing it, I went out and, I was in Japan and couldn't find No, I wasn't in Japan. I guess I'm just a geek. So I bought a bunch of books, like Richard Dawkins books and Christopher Hitchens and what's the other guy, Stephen something. Anyway, a bunch of these books by this sort of neo-atheists, the most famous sort of people pushing atheism as a thing, and getting really popular and selling a lot of books by doing that. And I was really disappointed because it seems like, especially with Richard Dawkins, but the others too, they're tearing down the man in the sky argument. And I'm like, I don't know. I guess there's still people who believe in God as a big dude in the sky with a beard and all that stuff. But I think really there's a lot more to this idea of God than that.
There's a much more sophisticated argument to be had than just saying that ignorant people are ignorant. Like, okay.
Yeah. You look at the Richard Dawkins types in the world, and that's all they're going after. I'm like, that's too easy,
Yeah.
It's easy to refute that. Let's talk about, like, the universe as an intelligent thing,
It almost seems like, is there anything positive that follows the word Neo? Other than Neo Geo?
Yeah, that's true. Everything that gets, it's like Hollywood's propensity for remaking everything.
Yeah.
There's always a new version. I've seen the new Blade Runner twice, both because other people wanted to see it. And I thought, it's not bad. It wasn't a bad movie. It's just
hot takes.
You could have left that alone. You could have just left the original Blade Runner as it is. You don't really.
I feel you.
I don't think they really added much to it. They just kind of did it again.
It was just like it was a good movie. There was nothing wrong with it, but it wasn't really necessarily. It didn't need to be made. The first one wasn't missing anything.
I think Ridley Scott was just up his own ass making Alien Covenant, and then he was like, "What? Harrison Ford's playing Han Solo again? Hold on, I got to get in on this." Yeah,
that could be it. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, and I watched Alien Covenant. We could talk about this all day, but I watched that on the airplane over to Europe. And I was like, oh, it's basically Alien. Like, it's the same plot points as the first Alien movie, but just kind of changed,
Yeah, right.
Even the ending was basically the same ending, but, with different characters.
So are you saying it was like the Star Wars 7 of Alien movies?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Okay, so we started talking about movies. I didn't want to start asking you questions off book and stuff, but maybe this is kind of about the book too. The title is It Came From Beyond Zen. Clearly you are a fan of monster movies. What is your favorite monster movie of all time?
Oh, God.
Yeah, hard-hitting questions.
My favorite Godzilla movie is this. They keep changing the title on me, which annoys me, but when I first saw it, it was called Monster Zero. And then they reissued it as Godzilla versus Monster Zero. And I'm like, okay, they just wanted to put Godzilla in the title so people know it's a Godzilla film. But then they reissued it as Invasion of Astro Monster, which is the dumbest,
Monster Zero sounds cool and menacing.
Yeah. Invasion of Astro Monster was the international title that Toho had picked for it when they were trying to market it, and nobody wanted it under that title, and they, the American distributors picked it up and called it Monster Zero, which is cool, But it's got Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, that flies, and it's got Rodan in it. It's got Godzilla, and it's got aliens who are played by these guys with these new wave sunglasses, like Devo before Devo existed sunglasses, and flying saucers. It's got everything. So I really like that one. I'm not too much into gore. I mean, it's Halloween time, and everybody's watching those. The Halloween movies. I don't know. I don't like to see like blood and guts very much. I like a good story. I just watched Psycho with my girlfriend the other day, which I hadn't seen in years, and I'm like, that's. It has that shower scene, but the shower scene is actually. They don't really show you much, but Hitchcock is great at suggesting what's going on, so you think that you saw something that you didn't actually see if you pay attention.
They always say that our own imagination is much better than anything that they'll show us.
And I also think there's merit to like giving a realism, like a raw realism to what's happening, because you want to elicit a response. Even if it's as simple as if somebody's getting shot in a movie, it's more impactful to make it look like someone actually got shot and remind you like, yeah, it's not fun watching somebody die. But
Well, yeah.
There's also just.
But if you're comically getting shot by a machine gun bouncing down the stairs.
No, what I mean is there's also just like indulging in. I don't go to a scary movie to be like, oh, I don't want to see that. Oh, that would suck if that happened to me. I go to a scary movie to be scared or psychologically creeped out. Like,
yeah, that's why I like going to Saw movies.
That's why I never watched a Saw movie.
I remember being oh, hey, that was psychological and it was gross. And then after that one, it was just like, oh, that was just gross.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the, if you watch my blog or anything, I've been a real big fan of Rick and Morty, but the only thing I don't like about Rick and Morty is occasionally they'll just run into the gross out area. Yeah. What was the one where there's one episode, I wish I could remember which exactly it was, but they have some violence that just kind of just goes on and on and on, and you're like, okay, well, we get it.
Like the King Jelly Bean.
Yeah.
Well, there's that. Yeah, that
Are you
was
talking
the
about
one
where they're like
of.
beating up the Nazis as strong people? Summer and Rick just like work out and they just start beating people up that are doing minor aggressions.
Oh yeah, there's that one too. Yeah, that isn't even the one I was thinking of. But yeah, there's a bit of that, and I saw an interview with. I think it's Justin Roiland's fault because he says in this interview that he's kind of into that thing, and Dan Harmon is kind of arguing with him about like, well, I think it's a little bit much. And I'm like, I'm on your side, Dan Harmon. But
aren't we all on Dan Harmon's side? All of us.
Well, he's an interesting character too. I actually met him and didn't know who he was. My friend Piruz, who introduced me. This was before I had discovered Rick and Morty, and we were at some movie premiere. His brother had done a movie. And Dan Harmon, I was at that premiere, and Piruz introduced me to him, and I'm like, oh, hi, how are you? I don't know who he is.
Is this like the Community times, like when he was doing Community?
Yeah, it was when that was on, and I hadn't watched Community, and he always ribs me about the fact that I met Dan Harmon and had no idea who he was.
My friend was just telling me yesterday about how Viggo Mortensen was a regular at the cafe in the bookstore she worked at. That's the guy that played Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. But he has short hair and no beard, and she didn't realize who he was. She interacted with him all the time, and they had talked about how much she loved Game of Thrones. And then he came back and he was like, hey, do you like Lord of the Rings? And she was like, oh, yeah, I love Lord of the Rings, blah, blah. And before he left the store, he came back with like a little bag. He bought the Lord of the Rings books and signed them for her. And she's like, why did you sign them for me? And he's like, I'm Aragorn. She's, what? Interesting little anecdote.
Yeah. Sometimes those things happen, but yeah, especially around here because I live in LA now. So you have it's kind of fun the fact that famous people are just walking down the street. And I walked by Courtney Love a couple of months ago, and actually my girlfriend noticed it was Courtney Love. I didn't notice.
Yeah.
we were just walking down the street somewhere, and hey, that was Courtney Love. And I'm like, oh,
did you give her any change or?
Did I what?
Did you give her some change, or are you above that?
No, but I didn't really notice her, but she said she looked kind of bad.
I guess that joke was in poor taste if she's actually doing bad. I assume she was doing well, and why would I assume that about Courtney?
Well, yeah, I don't know why anybody would ever assume that about her.
I think she's got plenty of money and stuff, but she was
not the problem.
Kind of disheveled. Yeah.
I watch your YouTube vlogs, and I love kind of creeping on your bookshelf behind you and checking out the different book titles you have.
Yeah.
You have an impressive collection. It seems like you change it up purposefully for the purpose of the background.
I do. I started doing that because I realized when I was going through the videos, it helped me figure out which one was which if I changed the stuff in the background a little bit.
Okay.
That's so smart.
Then people started writing me, and they noticed these things. So now I kind of just do it to mess with people.
Well, I am one of those people. I noticed your Dinosaurs Attack. Was it a book or?
Probably. I have a book, and I have the full set of the cards. But there's a I guess it was a comic book series. I mean, I knew the trading cards, but I guess it was a comic book series that I hadn't known existed. But it's actually pretty good. And then they collected it into a book.
No one knows Dinosaurs Attack. Everybody knows Mars Attacks. Barely anybody actually knows that was a card series anymore, which drives me crazy. Yeah. In the 80s, there was those Dinosaurs Attacks cards. I was just wondering if you had any interesting history with that at all, because I've never met anybody that knew them. I actually have a box full of unopened booster packs with the bubble gum still in them. I'd be happy to send you a few, man.
Can I have the bubble gum now?
Craig can have, yeah.
Actually, I think I have the full set of cards now. I finally got them, but I don't know if it's an interesting story. There's a video somebody just I put it up on YouTube years ago of me and a friend of mine walking around Akron, Ohio. And I shot it before I even moved to Japan on VHS, and I found it a few years ago, and I digitized it and put it up on YouTube. But these people who are doing a movie about Akron wanted to use a bit of that video. And the Dinosaurs Attack connection is in that video. I've got the camera on my shoulder, and I'm following this friend of mine who's going to buy a beer at a store next to where we lived. And so he gets his beer, and I said, and get a pack of Dinosaurs Attack cards, because I noticed he had these Dinosaurs Attack cards on his counter. So this would be about 1990, so I think they were still current at the time.
Oh.
You know, they kind of, you know.
That's amazing.
But so I've got video of me in the year 1990 making my friend buy me a set of Dinosaurs.
Those are so gore indulgent too, but it's cartoon.
Oh my god, yeah.
But it's not a movie shoving it in your face. It's a fun.
Well, they should do a
card.
movie of Dinosaurs Attack. That's, I wonder why they haven't done that.
All right, let's get the Kickstarter going.
Capitalize on the Jurassic World fandom, yeah.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah, I would think that would be a no-brainer. I'm sure somebody has optioned it by now, I would hope. I don't know why they don't make it, though.
Oh, probably because whenever it got brought up, they're like, don't you remember the Mars Attacks movie? No.
Yeah. Did that not do well? I think I was in Japan when that came out.
Am I the only person who likes the Mars Attacks movie?
I didn't hate it, but I know it got critically panned.
Maybe that's why they didn't do, that always happens.
We are running out of time, but I wanted to make sure that I get this out there. I hate to do this to you, man, but this is what they call ambush journalism. As a Buddhist teacher, some of your opinions on leadership really trouble me. Specifically, how the hell can you prefer Kirk over Picard?
I thought you were going to go with Trump. I got in trouble for not believing Trump is a Nazi. I mean, I don't like Trump, but I think people go way too far.
I was leading you on with that, but I am serious. It is a serious inquiry.
Well, I can actually answer that if you want an answer. I've been trying because I got Netflix and Hulu and all that, and I was trying to get into the Next Generation, but there's too many episodes where it's just like Data's cat or those things where they go and pretend to be Sherlock Holmes in the holodeck and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, come on.
What? That's how I felt before I watched the whole series, and those ended up being some of my favorite episodes. Like, there's
maybe I should just go from the start.
Do it. Go from the start. The first season's really rocky, but it's so good.
Only if you have the time, though. Please do other things first.
Well, I watch them late at night, and I often fall asleep. But I've been rewatching because I got the Blu-ray of the original series, and it's really science fiction. I'm a big fan of science fiction. In the original series, they had some heavyweight writers, like, speaking of Psycho, the Robert Bloch, I think is how you pronounce his name, the guy who wrote the novel that became Psycho, is one of the writers on Star Trek, and Theodore Sturgeon, who's a great science fiction writer, wrote for Star Trek. Several Norman Spinrad, who's a big science fiction. So they had all these heavyweight science fiction people writing episodes, and it was really a science fiction series, even if some of the ideas are sort of hokey nowadays. They were really trying to do something with it. And then when they rebooted it, it seemed like they were just into this sort of, it's like Cheers, it's like about the characters, which I understand the characters are important, but I want to get to the strange new worlds. I want to see those characters interact with some bizarre alien. And I hated the way they got into stock aliens, like the Klingons and stuff like that.
Just like ship-to-ship interactions. And
the Klingon episodes are probably the weakest of the series, if you ask me, for the Next Generation. But there is a lot of that sci-fi philosophical stuff that I think will whet your appetite too. And a lot of the holodeck episodes, for example, end up becoming more, philosophical and thought-provoking than you think they will. I mean, Data's obsessed with Sherlock Holmes, and there's this whole episode where, because he wanted a challenge, because he already knew all the books, so he could solve all the mysteries instantly, and he needed a challenge, so he asked the computer to make Moriarty equal an equal competitor to him, basically, and that now an artificial being is now like intelligent to start realizing that he's part of a simulation. And
okay, it gets like Philip K. Dick's territory, huh?
Yeah, there's some cool stuff in there, man. Give it a try.
Okay, I mean, one of the greatest shames, I think, of Star Trek finishing as early as it did, the early one, is two of my favorite science fiction writers, Philip Jose Farmer and Philip K. Dick, both had story submissions in when Star Trek was canceled, and it would have been great if you'd had a Philip K. Dick authoring a Star Trek episode.
Oh my God, that might have actually gotten me into it.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. Before we run out of time, is there anything you want to say to our listeners, or anything you want to plug? You have absolute free reign.
Oh God, I don't know. Just I'm trying to plug the book as much as possible, but I don't really. I'm doing some appearances in Canada. My blog, hardcorezen.info. I'm always updating that, and then I don't know actually the URL for my YouTube channel, but I know it's at the bottom of every article on hardcorezen.info.
Well, if you search for Hardcore Zen on YouTube, it should come right up. And your blog's great.
Yeah, probably.
Your blog's I generally read it when I'm eating my lunch and on my lunch break and stuff. It's a great, short, but thought-provoking pieces. Yeah,
I try to keep up with it. I've been getting into the videos lately because they're not as popular as the blog. I don't get as many hits, but I think it adds a different dimension, actually hearing the person saying the things, rather than just reading them. It's kind of, I don't know, there's pluses and minuses to both media, and I think it's interesting.
The vlog probably also reaches a different portion of an audience you probably wouldn't have gotten just from the blogs.
Yeah. I mean, there's people who aren't going to sit and spend the time to read a thing. I always try to keep the blog pieces short, but the videos, I do that. I started making videos because I started watching videos. I wanted to understand certain political viewpoints that I had previously dismissed out of hand. So I started watching videos by people who held those views and going, oh, that kind of makes sense. So.
Yeah, I love them, man. That's awesome. And sincerely, this has been a lot of fun and everything. It's been really cool just chatting. But, I really want to say a sincere, heartfelt, thank you, man. Your books have definitely had a big impact on my life. And I discovered Hardcore Zen when I was at a point when I needed to get back to the basics of Buddhism. And I had gotten a little bit off the rails in my spiritual life, maybe. And you really helped give me that grounding that I needed, an inspiration to just look at life for what it is.
Well,
I love it.
That's really nice to hear. And I always, if you read my stuff, you've probably heard me tell this story, but I wrote Hardcore Zen thinking there was no audience. I wrote it with complete impunity, or whatever you say. I wrote it with complete freedom because I thought there was no way this book is going to be published, so I can just say anything I want, because I didn't think there was an audience for it, and it surprised the hell out of me to discover that it wasn't just that there was an audience. There was a pretty big audience for that book, and I hear from people all the time who tell me that it really affected them deeply. And that's interesting to me in this sort of Mr. Spock sense, because I didn't really intend to affect anybody deeply. I was just trying to write what I thought, and get it down on paper. But yeah, so thanks.
I think what you're doing is really important, and it's a really good thing for the world. So it may not be the biggest splash in the puddle, but it's a very important one. I thank you.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
I let Craig borrow Hardcore Zen when we first met about 10 years ago. And
yeah, that was our bridge to each other, was your book.
Never did I think that we'd get this opportunity to sit down and chat.
I never know what I'm going to get when I open up for one of these interviews. Yeah. And often it's somebody I've never heard of before. And some of them are, this is a good one, I'll tell you that. Some of them are kind of uncomfortable and weird.
I've listened to a few bad ones where I was like, what is this interviewer fucking thinking?
Yeah, and I just want to know how bad other people are if we're the good ones.
No, it's because you have a real interest in the topic, and sometimes I feel like I'm getting put on as filler material for somebody's drive time. Literally, I've had a few times where I'm obviously filler material on some DJ's show. He's just putting me on to fill 5 minutes that he couldn't figure out anything else to do.
Really? That DJ couldn't figure out 4 more fart jokes?
Fart jokes. Yeah, it's kind of, I get those. I've done some weird ones. I did like the morning drive time DJ guys in Finland. And I got, they invited me to their studio, and they're the kind of guys, I mean, it's amazing that they have these in other countries, but the kind of guys who like honk horns and have weird sound effects. Oh my God,
I was hoping about the soundboard.
The goofy, they were just those kind of goofy morning DJ guys, but Finland has a small Swedish-speaking population, so they were Swedish-speaking. So they'd say some joke in Swedish, and then go,
oh my God, that sounds like I need to get a clip of this.
I don't know if it exists anymore, but I'll see if I can find it.
But seriously, thanks a lot for coming on, man.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh man, I'm still giddy.
That was so good, and I'm really excited we got him on here for that. He's a cool dude.
Yes, that was so much fun. Thank you so much, Brad. Listeners, I've read the book. I highly recommend it. My recommendation, honestly, go out and buy a few of his books. And I'm not just saying that. If you are already somebody that's into reading about Buddhism, then jump right into It Came From Beyond Zen. It is a new look at like things you've been reading for a long time, because like I said, no one else takes the pain to actually tell you what they actually fucking say. So like it's a whole, and that opens your mind to looking at it in a whole new way and looking at communication in a whole new way.
If you're more new to the teachings of Zen and Buddhism, would you say a better book would be maybe Hardcore Zen to start off with?
Hardcore Zen, or Sit Down and Shut Up. If you want to hear about Dogen, that was the first book Brad Warner wrote specifically about Dogen. I don't think it was the Shobogenzo. It was that's my favorite. It's got a picture of Buddha riding Godzilla on it.
Great.
So good. And it's like really great.
Can I get that tattooed on me? Or
I was just about to say, it's like tattoo style artwork. It's phenomenal. And I think Buddha, it's a punk rock Buddha, and he's got like a mohawk and piercings.
Buddha riding a Godzilla? Yeah, no, that needs to be on my butt cheek.
He writes some really fun books, and I do really recommend Gill Women from the Prehistoric Planet. I think it's a lot of fun.
Now, okay, so that's not a book about Buddhism. He had said that was what, a fictional? It's just a fictional story he wrote.
Yeah,
it's a novel.
It's hard to say what it's about. Honestly, I think it's good to go into it not really knowing what it's about.
And what was the name of that again?
Gill Women of the Prehistoric Planet.
It sounds like it should be its own 1950s monster movie.
Yes, and I will tell you that it's not a 1950s monster movie put into paperback form. That's not what you should expect. Don't expect a pulp sci-fi story.
Yeah, I'm just saying the name of the title sounds like that.
At the same time, do.
Oh.
It's something unexpected.
That was very Zen-like of you.
I don't want to tell you because I think it's really fun to just go in without knowing.
Do I understand it now? Did I do that right? Did I say that right? That was very Zen of you?
I think if you're a fan of Fair Enough or Fair Point podcast, or Brad Warner, I feel like if you're listening to this, you're a fan of one or the other. You were either searching for Brad Warner or Fair Enough podcast. So no matter which one, if you made it to the end of the podcast, you would be into Gill Women from the Prehistoric Planet. I really think so.
I'm going to go check it out.
It's unlike any other book. I'd let you borrow it, but I want you to buy it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally down for supporting this man. After meeting him, he's a wonderful human being.
And I'm recommending the books because I've bought them all because I wanted to, because I like them and I think it pays to. But at the same time, this is the way he makes his living. So, like, if you're interested, buy a fucking book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, don't be a dick, you know?
Don't be a jerk.
This book is available now. It's on shelves at bookstores near you. Hit up your local Borders, grab a coffee, and... Oh, wait, not Borders.
Or go to Amazon.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, come on. Didn't you live the experience? Go to your Borders that's not open anymore.
Or,
in the meantime, what few ways you can still support us is by hitting us up on Facebook.
Fair Point Podcast.
And, that's for us, fair enough, folks, too.
Brad Warner's got a Facebook account, too. And
hit him up on Facebook. Bug the crap out of him. I'm sure he'd love it.
He also plugged his blog, hardcorezen.info.
Do that up too.
that's the main place to find his stuff. That's what he pays the most attention to. That and his vlogs on YouTube, which I recommend him. He's got a fun series that he started recently too, where he's doing movies that people claim have a Zen message to them and evaluating whether or not that is the case.
Well, he's definitely an articulate human being, so I enjoyed listening to him talk. I wouldn't mind listening to him talk about other teachings.
Yeah, he talks about The Matrix and Empire Strikes Back in the 2 episodes he's done already. So, whether or not those movies actually do hold up as Zen philosophy or whether it's more superficial.
There you go, relating pop culture to Zen. There we go. Let's keep doing it. Let's do this.
Please, if you enjoyed the podcast, give us a rating, 5 stars. It helps more than you know. And
it really does.
If you can leave a review, that'd be great too. And keep in mind, Fair Enough Podcast is a spin-off of Fair Point Podcast. That's our show with a bigger production.
It's the main attraction.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff there.
We don't have Brad Warner on Fair Point, but we have other things on Fair Point.
So until next time. Oh, and there's the Pokemon podcast.
Yeah, Sylph Radio. Sylph Radio, SILPH. Sylph Radio, a Pokemon podcast. It's Sylph, SILPH, like the company in Pokemon. Yes, PH like the litmus test.
Like fat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Check it out if you like Pokemon. I host the show. Craig guest hosts the show several times. And there's plenty of other really fun guest hosts. And if you like Japanese culture, we frequently will delve into the mythological and cultural histories behind a lot of the designs of these Pokemon creatures and characters.
Hey, why not?
Yeah, so check it out. And if you enjoy the podcast, you can find it and more content like it at
secretroommultimedia.com.
That's secretroommultimedia.com. There's webcomics, music, podcasts, videos, everything your little heart could desire.
And there's going to be more. Just wait.
Just in case that Zen practice is doing nothing to get rid of your desire. That's okay. It's only human.
Yeah. Damn it. We want things. We want more.
And there's more coming. So until next time, thank you for listening. Be nice to each other. Don't be a jerk. And
that's another book of his.
If you're not enjoying your week, sit with that.
Yeah.
Sit with that.
I've been one of your hosts, Craig Lewis.
And I'm Nathan K.
The other host.
Namaste?
Sure, I guess.
Anarchy in the UK!
Happens when Logan goes to Sam's to buy 1 beer.
If we had less beer, we'd buy more beer, but we don't. Hey, this car attack.
There's the big piece of metal. Doesn't this look really cool? Yeah. Lone guy walking along the street smoking a cigarette looking at... Hey, you could do Bono. Well, how would Bono walk down this street?
He wouldn't. He'd have somebody to do it for him.
You kind of look like Bono from behind.
Sissy's Pizza, which is closed
Is
on
it?
Mondays.
That's for Sissy's Pizza. Pizza's very, very cheap. This is Sam's. We're going into now. You know, you really do look like Bono from the back. You should say something Bono-ish. You say, fuck you, Brad. I do not look like Bono. Okay, this is Sam's. Okay, there's the television. And let's see what kind of beer Logan picks out.
A beer.
A Schaefer's. Here, give me a Dinosaurs Attack. Heck, a Dinosaurs Attack.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, well, I'll give you a quarter later. Okay, he's gonna buy a beer and a pack of Dinosaurs Attack cards. So ask for a pack of Dinosaurs Attack cards.
Oh, and can I have a pack of Dinosaurs Attack cards, please?
Okay, I hope I get to the next introduction. Start going to the course again. Which one?
Dinosaurs.
But again, in Heat 1, came in third in Lane 2 for
What are you
TV,
doing,
Morris
Brad?
family. Isaac
What do you mean, what am I doing?
came in third.
Little Akron automobile. I'm going to show the intersection. Here's the intersection. It's getting dark. Here's the all-in-one. All-in-one. Sub shop, gasoline, food store. Yeah. Here's the car wash. It says, in case you didn't notice, under new management and closed.
Always under new management. The last 3 years I've lived here, it's been under new management.
North Hill is somewhere down there. The better part of North Hill. Okay. Causing accident. I'm really high. Downtown Akron is somewhere over that direction, but you can't see it. Well, here we are in downtown Akron. Thought we'd show you downtown Akron. What are some good sights to see? There is Bilbo's, one of the most boring places you can go for drinks. On weekends, there are about 4 people there. There's the downtown adult bookstore and video store, Doc Johnson Novelties. Maybe we should go in there. That'll be interesting.
I think we'd be arrested.
Could we? Most of downtown Akron is like this, closed, gone. So you can see this is gays footwear. I guess at one time if you were gay, you could come here and get footwear. Okay, there, just wanted to show you that block again. We're standing by it. Sarah's, which doesn't say Sarah's anymore. Used to be a nice place to go get sandwiches and stuff and hear like jazz music. I don't know what these other places were. They're all gone now. Well, including those ones on the block, that makes a lot. A lot of dead stores. A lot of stores now closed. A lot of dead stores now. They did the downtown. Really, you've seen most of downtown now that you've seen this video. I mean, you'd think, probably what you're looking at, you're filling in your mind that there's more to it, but there isn't. This is it.